want to turn to the audience again for another polling question. We can put that up, Miles. This question, outside the context of COVID-19 vaccines, what is the most likely patient population for mRNA vaccines and therapies? Choose all that apply. So your options are singular patients, highly personalized medicine, 50 to 500 patients, 50K to 500K patients, or 500,000 to 50 million patients. Make a selection there. And while our audience is responding to that poll, I'm wondering if our panelists are anticipating the supply chain situation improving as demand grows from a budding crop of mRNA developers, or if there are factors at play that will thwart a healthy demand-based supply. So I know we've touched on that a little bit. The fact that the demand is there, perhaps the supply is not keeping up with the demand right now, but as the market forecast bears out, do you see things getting better or worse? Dr. Dickens, I'll start with you since you're on screen.
Sounds good. So when we originally developed our platform 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, all of our raw materials were single source, particularly in the upstream space for the IVT reactions and the like. We currently have a continuous improvement project ongoing, and we've identified multiple suppliers for the different raw materials. So the landscape has certainly changed, and I'd say 70 to 80% of the raw materials have multiple sources now of equivalent or better raw materials. That project is currently ongoing, but that's a rough estimate. And only about 20%, that leaves about 20% that remains single sourced, at least in our raw materials scope for our platform.
Mm-hmm.
We've definitely seen a shift.
Yep. Roberta, what's the case at Seqirus?
Yeah, so when we look at the future, we also see that the demand is higher than the supply. I think we're all there. Dr. Zhou's comment around filters is a very real challenge that working with suppliers to resolve. But there are an increase of suppliers in this space, and so we do see eventually supply catching up. I want to go back to one of the other questions about what are some of the challenges, and Dr. Zhou and Dr. Dickens talked about the specific types of materials that are challenging to acquire and some of the inconsistencies that may be coming through. There are some other processes that come into play here. And so Dr. Zhou talked about qualifying multiple vendors. And we're seeing that that process of qualifying multiple vendors, the time it takes on both their side and our side, is an important piece to build in, especially when you want to be able to access materials as quickly as possible. So as we think about sort of the entire holistic process, this qualification of vendors and the quality aspects are critical, and we're finding that vendors are partnering with us to find creative ways to do that. And we are finding that there are continuing challenges in this space when you have a select group of vendors and multiple companies pulling on them in order to qualify. So it does become a bit of a bottleneck that adds to the supply chain challenge. So it's something that we watch very closely.
Yeah, very interesting. Just out of curiosity, how do you pay attention to that supplier market? Like, what's your best, I guess, medium for paying attention to who's new on the space, who's new on the scene, what the offerings look like, sort of paying attention to your supplier options?
Yeah, so we have a great partnership between our procurement organization and our technical development and research organizations in quality to continue to survey that market and understand what suppliers are coming into the space, how they fit into our matrix of needs. And so I would be remiss to try and describe the complexities of what our procurement team are doing, but they are working very closely to keep an eye on this on a continuous basis. And so as we identify additional materials or the need for alternative materials, their response time has been pretty impressive when helping us work through this, again, in partnership with our technical development team that's developing the processes and validating with quality and moving forward.
Yeah, okay. Let's take a look at that poll result. Miles, if you could make that show. There we go. Looks like the spread out pretty well across the board. Looks like the majority of our audience thinks that mRNA will be applicable to large patient populations, but spread pretty well across the board. Dr. Zhou, any I guess, initial reactions to the polling results shown here?
I think it's understandable, especially, right now it's a new technology, and then I know it's a lot of advantage to, especially personalized medicine. So I understand a lot of people probably want to use it as for a smaller scale, and then a single patient or small population of patient that rare, ultra rare disease. But eventually, given the success or given some story about, we use mRNA even to deliver monoclonal antibodies. So I do see in the future this mRNA therapeutic can enter mainstream, meaning, addressing more common disease like cancer, like other therapeutics. So I'm not surprised to see, people maybe have a vision that this technology can apply to a broader patient population.
Yeah. And, as noted earlier, the great majority of activity around mRNA has centered around COVID and flu. And I'd like to sort of shift gears here and talk a little bit about where it's going from here. And interestingly, I'd like to pose the question to Dr. Dickens and Roberta, given that you're both intently working on vaccine candidates. From that perspective, seeing mRNA as a messenger of the vaccine, what do you think about where the technology is going from here, from a therapeutic standpoint, beyond vaccines? And I'll start with you, Dr. Dickens.
So certainly, as I said earlier, delivering vaccines that are multimodal to be able to address the complexity of the virus, right, or the epitope on the virus, or the target. That certainly requires different constructs, and messenger RNA is part of that. Part two of that is we really don't know the histionics. We don't know whether the cellular machinery will continue after continual injections of messenger RNA. We don't know if it will continue to produce the same level of titer, right? So we need to know that over time and space, whether the machinery will continue to produce the antigen or antibody of interest, or the protein of interest. So.
Okay, thanks, Roberta. How about at Seqirus? What's the company's anticipation around where things go from here with mRNA?
Yeah, so our focus is in population protection, focused on influenza, and we'll continue to expand our portfolio there and pursue new and effective solutions in that space. So we're committed there and committed in delivering differentiated vaccines, and we have multiple platforms. And so when we think about the therapeutic space, what we have seen is I think what is we've all seen is that there is potential in that space. It's not the area of focus for us today. We have no idea what the focus will be in the future. When I say that, we're focusing on influenza, and as we build in the future, we'll look at other applications for the technology. But right now, there still continues to be an unmet need in influenza, and innovative solutions need to come through. And so while we have viable, safe, effective vaccines out there today in our cell-based vaccines, in our adjuvanted vaccines in influenza, we are seeing that there is a growing interest in mRNA around therapeutics.
Yeah. Okay, now I'll turn that question over to Dr. Zhou before entertaining some more audience questions. Dr. Zhou, given that your company is working on the application of mRNA in a more personalized medicine sort of context, what does it look like from Ultragenics' standpoint, where you take this platform forward? Where mRNA goes from here at Ultragenics?
So we have a first mRNA program that's just started phase 1 studies, and this program actually served as a kind of like a surrogate. And then we use it to establish our technology platform to have a proof of concept of the technology that using mRNA chronic dosing in a rare disease patient, if safety and efficacy prove to be acceptable, we will apply this to other rare disease indications. So with that, basically, that could leveraging the platform technology that could quickly develop a therapeutic for other rare disease. And then we see this as a great opportunity for rare disease patients.